They said, "We can't help you with college." But behind my back, they paid for my sister's law school. I stayed silent and closed the door on them forever. My name is Jessica, and I'm 29 years old. I have one sister, Amanda, who's 31. Growing up, we weren't particularly close, but we weren't enemies either. We just existed in the same house, went to the same high school, and lived parallel lives. Our parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, always seemed fair in their treatment of us. Or so I thought. The story really begins when I was 17, a senior in high school with big dreams and even bigger college aspirations. I had worked my ass off throughout high school, 3.8 GPA, captain of the debate team, volunteer work at the local animal shelter, and a part-time job at Target to save money for college. I had my heart set on Northwestern University's journalism program. It was expensive, sure, but I'd been planning for it since sophomore year. When I brought up college financing with my parents that spring, I expected the conversation most families have about student loans, scholarships, and maybe some parental contribution. What I got instead was a cold, matter-of-fact shutdown. "Jessica, we love you, but we simply can't help you with college expenses," my mother said, not even looking up from her crossword puzzle. "Your father's business has been struggling, and we're barely keeping our heads above water. You'll need to figure it out on your own." My dad nodded along. "Maybe consider community college first, then transfer. It's more practical." I was devastated but not defeated. I spent the next few months working double shifts, applying for every scholarship I could find, and ultimately had to settle for State University with a partial scholarship and a mountain of student loans. It wasn't Northwestern, but it was still a good school, and I was determined to make it work. Meanwhile, Amanda had graduated the year before and was taking a gap year, supposedly finding herself while working at our aunt's boutique. She seemed in no hurry to pursue higher education, and my parents never pressured her about it. College was rough. I worked 2 jobs while maintaining a full course load, morning shifts at a campus coffee shop and evening shifts at a local restaurant. I lived on ramen noodles and generic cereal, wore the same 5 outfits on rotation, and couldn't afford to come home for most holidays because of gas money. Every semester was a financial crisis. I remember crying in the financial aid office more times than I cared to admit, begging for additional help, applying for emergency funds just to buy textbooks. My parents would call occasionally, always with the same script: "How's school? We're proud of you for making it work." They never offered help, never asked if I needed anything, never acknowledged the sacrifice I was making to get an education they could have easily helped fund. Amanda, during this time, seemed to be living her best life. She'd moved into her own apartment, was driving a newer car, and always seemed to have money for clothes, trips, and nights out. When I asked her about work, she was vague. "Oh, just helping Aunt Marie. Business is good." I graduated in 4 years with a degree in communications and about $58,000 in student loan debt. I was exhausted, burnt out, and financially destroyed, but I had done it entirely on my own. My parents came to graduation, took pictures, said they were proud, and that was that. After college, I moved to Chicago and slowly started building my career. I got a job at a mid-sized marketing firm, lived in a tiny studio apartment with a broken air conditioner, and spent every spare dollar paying down my loans. Life was hard, but I was making it work. Amanda, around this time, announced she was going to law school. Not just any law school, Columbia Law School in New York City. One of the most prestigious and expensive law schools in the country. She was 25 at the time, having taken a few years after her gap year to figure things out. "Wow, Amanda, that's incredible," I said when she called to tell me. "How are you going to manage the tuition? Columbia is like $75,000 a year." "Oh, I've been saving," she said casually. "Plus scholarships and stuff. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I knew exactly how impossible it was to save enough money for Columbia while working retail at our aunt's boutique, but I didn't press. Maybe she had been saving aggressively, or maybe she got a full ride. Stranger things had happened. Over the next 3 years, while I was grinding away in Chicago, slowly climbing the corporate ladder and living paycheck to paycheck, Amanda was living it up in Manhattan. Her social media showed expensive restaurants, Broadway shows, weekend trips to the Hamptons, designer clothes. For a law student supposedly struggling with tuition, she seemed awfully comfortable. Whenever I brought this up during family calls, my parents were dismissive. "Amanda's always been good with money," my mother would say. "She's probably just networking, you know how law school is." The first crack in the facade came during my 25th birthday. I had finally gotten a promotion and was making decent money, though I was still years away from paying off my student loans. I decided to throw myself a small party at my apartment, nothing fancy, just pizza and beer with a few work friends. My parents called to wish me happy birthday, and during the conversation, my mother accidentally let something slip. "We're so proud of how independent you've become," she said. "Unlike some people, you never asked us for money after high school." "What do you mean, unlike some people?" I asked. There was a pause. "Oh, nothing. Just, some of your cousins are always asking their parents for help." It was weird phrasing, but I let it go. I had bigger things to worry about than parsing my mother's random comments. The second crack came 6 months later. I was visiting home for Christmas, and Amanda was there too, back from law school for winter break. She looked amazing, expensive clothes, professional highlights in her hair, carrying a designer purse I recognized as costing more than my monthly rent. During dinner, she casually mentioned needing to find a summer internship. "Most of the good ones are unpaid," she sighed. "It's so unfair. How are students supposed to survive in New York without income for 3 months? Can't you ask mom and dad for help?" I joked. "Oh wait, they don't do that." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked uncomfortable, and Amanda suddenly became very interested in her plate. "What?" I asked, looking around the table. "Nothing," my father said quickly. "Amanda, tell us more about your classes." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. But I pushed it aside and focused on my own life. The truth finally came out in the most mundane way possible. I was 26, had been living in Chicago for 4 years, and was finally in a good place professionally. I'd gotten another promotion, moved into a decent 1-bedroom apartment, and could actually afford to buy name-brand groceries. My student loans still had about $30,000 left on them, but I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was home for Easter weekend, and my mother had gone to the grocery store while my father was in his study. I needed to print something for work and asked if I could use his computer. He said yes without looking up from his newspaper. I opened his laptop and went to pull up a browser when I noticed several tabs were already open. One of them was titled Student Account, Columbia University, and my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the tab. It opened to Amanda's student account portal, apparently still logged in from when my father had been managing something. And right there, clear as day, was her account balance, $0. Not just current balance, but historical balance. The entire tuition section showed payments made directly from an external source labeled R. Morrison, external payment. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not processing what I was seeing. Then I clicked on the payment history. Fall 2020, $73,800, paid in full. Spring 2021, $73,800, paid in full. Fall 2021, $76,200, paid in full. Spring 2022, $76,200, paid in full. Fall 2022, $78,400, paid in full. Spring 2023, $78,400, paid in full. The payments went on and on. Not just tuition, but housing, meal plans, even a monthly living expenses deposit of $3,500. My parents had paid for everything. They had given Amanda over $456,600 for law school, plus living expenses totaling another $126,000 over 3 years. We're talking about nearly $583,000 total. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking. This was more money than I would make in 12 years at my current salary. This was more money than my entire student loan debt multiplied by 10. This was the money they said they didn't have when I needed help with college. I quickly closed the browser and printed my document, my mind reeling. I went through the rest of the weekend on autopilot, smiling and nodding during family dinners, acting normal while inside I was screaming. The worst part wasn't even the money, though that stung terribly. It was the lies. 8 years of lies. 8 years of watching me struggle, watching me work multiple jobs, watching me eat ramen for dinner 4 nights a week, watching me skip Christmas visits because I couldn't afford gas money, and never once offering to help or even acknowledging that they could help. But they had hundreds of thousands of dollars for Amanda. They had money for her expensive apartment, her designer clothes, her networking dinners, her spring break trips. They had money for everything she could possibly need and more. I drove back to Chicago that Sunday in complete silence, not even playing music. I needed to think. I needed to process what I had learned and figure out what to do with this information. The 3-hour drive felt like an eternity. Every mile marker brought new waves of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I kept replaying every conversation, every family dinner, every phone call where my parents had expressed sympathy for my financial struggles while secretly funding Amanda's luxury lifestyle. I remembered the time during my sophomore year when I called home crying because I couldn't afford my textbooks and was going to have to drop a class. My mother had listened sympathetically and suggested I try to find used copies online or share with a classmate. "We wish we could help, honey, but money is just so tight right now," she had said. At that exact moment, They were probably writing another $70,000 check for Amanda's tuition. I remembered working the morning shift at the campus coffee shop, then running to afternoon classes, then working the evening shift at the restaurant until 11 p.m., only to come home and study until 2 a.m. I remembered falling asleep in my introduction to psychology class and having my professor ask if everything was okay at home. I was too embarrassed to tell her I was working 35 hours a week just to afford groceries. Meanwhile, Amanda was posting Instagram stories from expensive brunches in Manhattan, complaining about how exhausting law school was while showing off her perfectly manicured nails and designer study outfits. When I finally got back to my apartment that night, I sat on my second-hand couch in my tiny living room and did something I rarely allowed myself to do anymore. I cried. Not the frustrated tears of someone struggling to pay bills, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone whose entire understanding of their family had just shattered. I had always been proud of my independence. When people asked how I managed to work my way through college, I wore it like a badge of honor. My parents taught me the value of hard work, I would say. They couldn't help financially, but they gave me the tools to succeed on my own. I had actually been grateful for what I thought was their principled stance on self-reliance. Now I understood that it wasn't principles at all. It was favoritism, plain and simple. My first instinct was to call Amanda and confront her. But something held me back. She had to know that I thought I was paying my own way through college while she was getting a free ride. She had to know that I was struggling financially while she was living like a trust fund baby. And she had never said a word. I thought about all the times she had complained to me about law school expenses, knowing full well that she wasn't paying a dime. I thought about the times she had sympathized with my financial stress while sitting in her luxury apartment that our parents were paying for. The manipulation was breathtaking. Then I thought about calling my parents. But what would I say? I accidentally saw Amanda's student account and discovered you've been lying to me for 8 years? How do you even begin to have that conversation? Over the next few days, I became obsessed with trying to understand the logic behind their decision. I analyzed every family interaction, every childhood memory, looking for clues about why they had chosen Amanda over me. Was it because she was older? But I had always been more academically focused. Was it because she was more social? But I had been just as involved in extracurricular activities. Was it because they thought she had more potential? But my grades had been better than hers in high school. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there might not be any logic to it at all. Sometimes parents just have favorites, and they rationalize it after the fact. I spent hours researching the cost of law school, calculating exactly how much money my parents had given Amanda. Tuition, room and board, living expenses, books, even her expensive clothes and entertainment budget, it all added up to nearly $500,000 over 3 years. That was more than I would earn in a decade at my current salary. I thought about what I could have done with that money. I could have gone to Northwestern like I dreamed. I could have taken unpaid internships at prestigious magazines or newspapers, building connections and experience instead of just trying to survive. I could have studied abroad, expanded my worldview, learned languages. I could have graduated debt-free and started my adult life with a foundation instead of a mountain of debt. But more than the opportunities I had missed, I was devastated by the lies. 8 years of lies. My parents had watched me struggle and made the active choice not to help, even though they had the resources to make my life immeasurably easier. I started paying attention to things I had never noticed before. During our weekly phone calls, I listened carefully to how my parents talked about money. They still maintained the fiction that finances were tight. My father still complained about business being slow. My mother still clipped coupons and talked about budgeting. But I had seen the bank transfers. I knew they had been paying Amanda $3,000 a month in living expenses alone. That was more than my entire monthly budget for rent, food, and transportation combined. I also started noticing how they talked about Amanda versus how they talked about me. When discussing Amanda's law school experience, they used words like investment and future and building her career. When discussing my college experience, they used words like character building and independence and learning the value of money. They had reframed their neglect of me as a valuable life lesson, while their support of Amanda was presented as smart financial planning. The psychological manipulation was almost more painful than the financial betrayal. I began to realize that this pattern probably went back much further than college. I started remembering childhood incidents with new clarity. The family vacation to Europe the summer after I graduated high school, a trip I couldn't go on because I was working double shifts to save for college. At the time, my parents said they had gotten a last-minute deal and there wasn't room in the budget for a fourth ticket. But Amanda went, and now I suspected they had simply chosen not to include me. The car situation when we were teenagers. Amanda got a reliable used Honda for her 17th birthday. When I turned 17, my parents said they couldn't afford another car, so I would have to save up and buy my own. I spent my entire senior year working at Target, saving every penny, and finally bought a beat-up Ford with 150,000 miles that broke down constantly. I had been proud of earning that car myself, but now I wondered if it was just another example of different rules for different daughters. Even smaller things started to make sense. Birthday and Christmas presents that were noticeably more expensive for Amanda. Emergency loans that Amanda received when she needed money, which were never offered to me and which I now suspected were never actually repaid. The family's reaction when Amanda decided to take a gap year, supportive and understanding. Their reaction when I suggested taking a gap year to save more money for college, disappointed and discouraging. I had always attributed these disparities to timing, circumstances, or Amanda's different personality. Now I saw them as part of a long-standing pattern of favoritism. The worst part was realizing how much energy I had spent over the years defending my parents' choices to other people. When friends in college complained about their parents not helping enough financially, I had actually stood up for the principle of self-reliance. My parents couldn't help me either, I would say, but I think it made me stronger and more independent. When my boyfriend in college suggested that my parents could probably afford to help more than they were, I had gotten angry with him. "You don't understand our family situation," I had said. "My parents have always taught us to stand on our own 2 feet." I had been their unwitting accomplice in maintaining the lie, even to myself. As the weeks passed, I found myself conducting little tests during our phone conversations. I would mention financial stress and see how they responded. I would ask casual questions about Amanda's living situation and job. I would make comments about the cost of living in New York and watch for any slip-ups. My parents passed these tests perfectly. They maintained their characters flawlessly. They expressed appropriate sympathy for my money troubles, asked caring questions about my budget, and offered emotional support without ever offering financial help. They praised Amanda's financial responsibility and good planning when I mentioned how well she seemed to be doing. Amanda was equally skilled at maintaining the deception. When I asked how she was managing to afford her expensive lifestyle on a law student's budget, she always had ready answers. She had gotten a great deal on her apartment because she knew someone. She had bought her designer clothes on sale or outlets. She was careful with money and good at finding bargains. The sophistication of the lies was almost impressive. They had clearly discussed their story and coordinated their responses. This wasn't a spontaneous deception, it was a carefully orchestrated family conspiracy. I started to wonder if other people knew. Did my Aunt Marie know that the boutique job was just a cover story? Did my grandparents know where Amanda's law school money was really coming from? Did extended family members know why I never seemed to have money for family events while Amanda always seemed flush? Was I the only one who had believed the fiction? So I decided to do something else. I decided to wait and see what would happen naturally. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe they were planning to help me pay off my student loans retroactively, or help me with a down payment on the house, or something to balance the scales. Amanda graduated from Columbia that spring. The family celebration was elaborate, a fancy dinner at an expensive restaurant, gifts, champagne, the whole 9 yards. My parents were glowing with pride. "We're so proud of both our girls," my mother said, raising her glass. Jessica with her successful career, and Amanda starting her legal career. We did something right. I smiled and nodded and said nothing. Amanda got a job at a prestigious law firm in Manhattan with a starting salary higher than what I made after 4 years of promotions. She moved into a luxury apartment in Soho and bought a brand new BMW. During family calls, she would casually mention her expensive dinners, her weekend getaways, her shopping trips. Meanwhile, I was still plugging away at my student loans, still living modestly, still being careful with every dollar. Months passed. Then a year. No mention of helping me financially. No acknowledgement of the disparity. No recognition that they had given one daughter everything and the other daughter nothing. During this time, I became hyper-aware of every family interaction. Every phone call was analyzed for hidden meanings. Every casual comment was scrutinized for clues about what they really thought of me versus Amanda. I started keeping a mental tally of the differences in how they treated us. When Amanda mentioned needing new furniture for her apartment, my mother immediately offered to go shopping with her and help her pick out some nice pieces. When I mentioned that my couch was falling apart, my mother suggested checking out thrift stores and estate sales. When Amanda complained about the stress of law school, my father would share wisdom about the importance of investing in education and how the hard work would pay off in the long run. When I complained about work stress, he would tell me that everyone has to pay their dues and that I should be grateful to have steady employment. When Amanda posted photos from expensive restaurants on social media, my parents would comment with heart emojis and "looks delicious." When I posted a photo of a home-cooked meal, they would comment with "good for you, saving money." The differential treatment was everywhere once I started looking for it, but it was always subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. I also started paying closer attention to Amanda's behavior during family gatherings. Now that I knew the truth, her casual comments about money took on a different tone. When she mentioned being broke after a shopping spree, I knew she was performing for my benefit. When she talked about budgeting and being careful with money, I knew she was maintaining the illusion that we were in the same financial situation. She had become remarkably good at playing the role of a struggling graduate student. She would complain about the cost of textbooks while carrying a purse that cost more than my monthly salary. She would lament the price of groceries in Manhattan while wearing shoes I recognized from a high-end boutique window display. The performance was flawless, which made it even more insulting. I found myself becoming quietly obsessed with calculating the exact financial impact of my parents' favoritism. I researched typical starting salaries for Northwestern journalism graduates versus state school graduates. I calculated the compound interest on the money I had spent on student loans versus what I could have earned if that money had been invested. I estimated the networking opportunities and career connections I had missed by working service jobs instead of taking unpaid internships. The total cost of their decision, not just the money they gave Amanda, but the opportunities they cost me, was staggering. We weren't just talking about a financial advantage, we were talking about two completely different life trajectories. Amanda was on the fast track to partnership at a prestigious law firm, with a starting salary higher than what I made after years of experience. I was grinding away in middle management at a marketing firm, proud of my progress but realistically looking at decades of slow advancement. She lived in Manhattan, traveled internationally, wore designer clothes, and moved in professional circles that would accelerate her career. I lived in Chicago, saved for vacation weekends in Wisconsin, shopped at Target, and socialized with other middle-class professionals who were all struggling with the same financial limitations. We were living in different worlds, and my parents had deliberately placed us in those worlds. The psychological toll of maintaining normal family relationships while harboring this knowledge was enormous. I found myself dreading phone calls home because I had to pretend everything was fine. Family gatherings became exercises in performance art, where I played the role of the grateful daughter who was proud of her independence. I started declining invitations to family events, claiming work commitments or other obligations. My parents seemed disappointed but didn't push too hard. I think they attributed my increasing distance to the natural process of adult children becoming more independent. If only they knew. I also found myself pulling away from Amanda specifically. Our relationship had never been particularly close, but we had maintained a cordial sibling dynamic. Now, every interaction felt loaded with deception. When she called to chat about her life, I knew she was editing out all the details that would reveal her true financial situation. When I shared my own struggles and frustrations, I knew she was pretending to relate to experiences she had never had. The worst part was that she was good at it. She had clearly practiced the art of sympathetic listening, making all the right noises about how hard it was to be a young adult in today's economy, how expensive everything was, how difficult it was to get ahead financially. She had developed a convincing repertoire of shared struggles that were completely fabricated. Sometimes I would test her, mentioning specific financial pressures just to see how she would respond. She always had perfect answers, stories about similar challenges she had faced, advice about budgeting and cost-cutting, expressions of solidarity about the difficulties of student loan debt, which she had never had. The sophistication of her deception was almost impressive, but it was also deeply disturbing. This wasn't just lying about money, this was lying about the fundamental nature of our relationship and her understanding of my life experiences. I began to realize that not only had my parents betrayed me, but Amanda had been an active participant in that betrayal. She could have told me the truth at any point. She could have acknowledged the disparity and maybe even advocated for me with our parents. She could have at least stopped pretending that we were in the same boat financially. Instead, she had chosen to maintain the lie, presumably because it served her interests to do so. I started to realize that this wasn't an oversight or a temporary situation. This was intentional. For whatever reason, my parents had decided that Amanda deserved their financial support and I didn't. Maybe they thought I was more independent. Maybe they thought Amanda needed more help. Maybe they just liked her better. I would probably never know the real reason. But I knew I had to make a decision about what to do with this knowledge. The decision crystallized for me during Christmas 2 years ago. I was 27, Amanda was 29, and we were both home for the holidays. The family dynamic was exactly the same as always, pleasant, surface level, everyone playing their roles. But now I was watching everything through a different lens. I noticed how my parents' faces lit up when Amanda walked into a room. I noticed how they asked more detailed questions about her work, her apartment, her social life. I noticed how they remembered small details about her daily routine but seemed to forget things I had told them about my own life. During Christmas Eve dinner, Amanda casually mentioned that she was thinking about buying a vacation home in the Hamptons with some law school friends. My parents were immediately interested, asking about locations and investment potential and offering to help her research real estate markets. Later that same evening, I mentioned that I was hoping to buy my first house in the next few years, and my parents nodded politely and changed the subject to something else. The contrast was so stark that I wondered how I had missed it all these years. But of course, I had missed it because I was operating under the assumption that we were treated equally. When you believe you're getting the same treatment as your sibling, you don't notice the subtle differences in attention, interest, and investment. Christmas morning brought a new level of awareness. Amanda's gifts were clearly more expensive and more thoughtfully chosen. She received jewelry, high-end electronics, designer accessories, and gift cards to expensive stores. My gifts were nice but noticeably more practical and budget-conscious: books, kitchen gadgets, gift cards to Target. When I was younger, I had attributed these differences to Amanda being older or having different interests. Now I understood that they reflected fundamentally different levels of investment in our respective happiness and success. But the moment that really crystallized everything happened during Christmas dinner, as it often does during the holidays. During Christmas dinner, the conversation turned to finances, as it often does during the holidays. "The economy is so tough for young people these days," my mother said, passing the potatoes. "It's so much harder than when your father and I were starting out." "Tell me about it," I said, cutting my ham. "These student loans are killing me. I'll probably be paying them off for another 6 years." "Well, that's the price of education these days," my father replied. "At least you're making steady progress." Amanda, who had just bought a $3,000 handbag the week before, according to her Instagram, nodded sympathetically. "Student loans are the worst. I'm so grateful I was able to avoid them." That was the moment. That was when I realized that not only were they never going to come clean about what they had done, but they were going to continue pretending that we had both struggled equally. Amanda was going to continue pretending she had avoided student loans through her own clever planning, not because our parents had paid her way. The audacity of that statement, "I'm so grateful I was able to avoid them," while sitting at a table with her sister who was still paying off debt from an education that cost a fraction of what her law school had cost, was breathtaking. I looked around the table at my family, my parents, who had lied to me for 8 years, my sister, who had let me struggle while she lived in luxury, and I made my decision. But I didn't make that decision in anger or hurt, although those emotions were certainly present. I made it with a kind of cold clarity that surprised me. These people had shown me who they were through their actions over many years. They had shown me that they were capable of elaborate deceptions, that they were comfortable with massive inequality within their own family, and that they had no intention of acknowledging or correcting their behavior. More importantly, they had shown me that they were comfortable letting me believe lies about my own life. They were comfortable letting me think I was getting equal treatment when I was actually getting drastically different treatment. They were comfortable letting me defend their choices to other people, making me complicit in maintaining their fiction. That level of manipulation and disrespect wasn't something I could overlook or forgive. It wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, sustained campaign of deception that had shaped nearly a decade of my adult life. I was done. After Christmas dinner, I went home and started planning. Not planning revenge, not planning a confrontation, not planning to expose them. I started planning my exit from their lives. The thing about discovering a betrayal this deep is that it changes everything retroactively. Every memory becomes suspect. Every gesture of support rings hollow. Every expression of pride feels like a lie. I couldn't look at my family the same way anymore, and I didn't want to pretend I could. But I also realized that confronting them wouldn't accomplish anything meaningful. What was I going to do? Demand an explanation? They would probably have one ready, some story about how they thought I was more capable of handling adversity, or how they didn't want to interfere with my independence, or how they were planning to help me later but the timing never seemed right. They might even offer to help me financially now, but what would be the point? The damage was done. They had made their choice about who deserved their support during the years when it would have mattered most. Any help now would feel like guilt money, not love. And even if they apologized, what would that change? An apology doesn't erase 8 years of lies. It doesn't restore the opportunities I missed or the stress I endured unnecessarily. It doesn't change the fact that they were comfortable watching me struggle when they could have easily helped. Most importantly, it doesn't change the fundamental character issue that their behavior revealed. These weren't people who had made a mistake. These were people who had made a choice, consistently and deliberately, over many years. And given the chance to come clean at any point, they had chosen instead to double down on the deception. So I stopped pretending. It started small. I stopped calling as often. When they called me, I kept the conversations brief and surface level. I stopped sharing details about my life, my work, my relationships. I became polite but distant. Then I stopped going home for holidays. When they asked why, I made up excuses: work commitments, travel plans, other obligations. They seemed disappointed but didn't push too hard. Over the next year, I essentially phased them out of my life. Not dramatically, not with angry confrontations or ultimatums, but quietly and systematically. I moved to a new apartment and didn't give them my address. I changed my phone number and only gave them my work number. I removed them from my social media accounts. When they tried to stay connected, I was always pleasant but unavailable. Sorry, can't talk long, I'm heading into a meeting. Thanks for the invitation, but I already have plans. Let me get back to you about that. Amanda tried reaching out a few times, but I gave her the same treatment. Polite, distant, unavailable. The beauty of this approach was that they couldn't really complain about it. I wasn't being rude or hostile. I wasn't causing drama or making accusations. I was just not there anymore. And there's no socially acceptable way to demand that someone prioritize you in their life. The final break came 8 months ago. My mother called my work number, the only one she had, and left a message saying that my grandmother was in the hospital and asking me to call back immediately. I did call back, and I found out that my grandmother was indeed in the hospital, but it wasn't life-threatening. She had fallen and broken her hip and was expected to make a full recovery. My mother wanted me to come home to visit her. I can't get away from work right now, I said. But please give her my love and tell her I'm thinking of her. Jessica, my mother said, and her voice was different. More desperate. We haven't seen you in over a year. What's going on? Are you angry with us about something? This was my moment. I could have confronted her. I could have laid out everything I knew about Amanda's law school funding. I could have demanded an explanation, an apology, retroactive financial help. Instead, I said, I'm not angry, Mom. I'm just busy building my own life. But we're your family, she said, and I could hear her starting to cry. I know, I said. Give Grandma my love. I have to go. That was the last time I spoke to any of them. My grandmother recovered fully, and I sent her a card directly at the hospital with my love and best wishes. I didn't go through my parents. 3 months ago, Amanda got engaged to a lawyer she met at her firm. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, not through my family. I didn't send congratulations. Last month, my parents hired a private investigator to find my current address. I know this because the PI contacted me directly to verify that I was who they were looking for. I told him yes, I was Jessica Morrison, and no, I didn't want my family to have my contact information. Apparently, they wanted to invite me to Amanda's engagement party. I declined through the mediator. Here's the thing that people don't understand about this kind of betrayal, it's not really about the money. Don't get me wrong, the money matters. $400,000 would have changed my life completely. I could have gone to Northwestern. I could have graduated debt-free. I could have taken unpaid internships that led to better jobs. I could have moved to New York or Los Angeles instead of staying in Chicago. I could have bought a house by now instead of renting. But the money is just the surface. The real betrayal is the deception. The real betrayal is watching me struggle and choosing not to help when they easily could have. The real betrayal is letting me believe that I was getting the same treatment as my sister when I was actually getting completely different treatment. The real betrayal is that they decided, for reasons I will never know, that I was worth less than Amanda. That I deserved less. That my dreams and goals and financial stress were less important than hers. And Amanda was complicit in all of it. She knew I was working multiple jobs to pay for school while she was getting a free ride. She knew I was living on ramen while she was eating at expensive restaurants. She knew I was stressed about money constantly while she had a $3,000 monthly allowance. And she never said a word. So I'm done. I'm done pretending we're a happy family. I'm done acting like everything is normal. I'm done being grateful for their support when they gave me nothing and her everything. The ironic thing is that I'm doing better than ever now. Without the emotional drain of maintaining relationships with people who fundamentally didn't value me, I've thrived. I got another promotion last year and I'm now making 6 figures. I'm in a great relationship with a man who actually treats me as an equal. I bought my first house 3 months ago, a beautiful 3-bedroom in a nice neighborhood that I can afford completely on my own. I paid off my student loans 2 years ago, entirely with my own money. It took me 7 years, but I did it. And you know what? I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I struggled and survived and thrived without their help. I'm proud that I built something real and lasting with my own hands. My family, on the other hand, is apparently falling apart. According to the few mutual acquaintances I still have, my parents are devastated by my absence. They don't understand what they did wrong. They've gone to therapy, they've tried to reach out through other relatives, they've written letters that I haven't read. Amanda's engagement is apparently strained because her fiancé thinks it's weird that she doesn't have a relationship with her sister. He's been asking questions about our family dynamics that she can't answer honestly without revealing the truth about law school. My grandmother, who recovered from her fall, has been asking about me. She knows something is wrong but doesn't know what. The whole family ecosystem that was built on lies and pretense is crumbling now that I'm not there to play my role. But here's what they don't understand: I don't want an apology. I don't want an explanation. I don't want them to pay off my student loans retroactively or try to make things fair now. It's too late for any of that. What they did wasn't a mistake or a miscommunication. It was a deliberate choice made over and over again for 8 years. They chose Amanda over me, consistently and thoroughly. They chose to lie to me rather than be honest about their priorities. They chose to let me struggle rather than help me succeed. Those weren't momentary lapses in judgment. They were character choices. And character, once revealed, doesn't change just because someone feels bad about the consequences. I don't hate them. I actually feel sorry for them. They had 2 daughters, and they chose to fully support one while abandoning the other. Now they have one daughter who's living a life built on their money and their lies, and another daughter who wants nothing to do with them. They chose Amanda, and now they can live with that choice. As for me, I'm building a life that's entirely my own. A life where I'm valued and respected and treated as an equal. A life where no one lies to me or pretends I'm getting something I'm not. A life where I can be proud of everything I've accomplished because I know I earned it. They said they couldn't help me with college, but behind my back, they paid for my sister's law school. I stayed silent about what I discovered, and I closed the door on them forever. And I've never been happier.